The applicant nervously adjusts his tie. Again. He's a fresh law school graduate who knows just how hard it is to get your foot in the door in the cutthroat legal world. Hundreds of people applied online for this position at the prestigious firm of Gilbert and Evans, but only 20 or so were considered good enough to be offered an in-person interview, and only one of them will get the job. The applicant has been here since 10 a.m., and after 2 long, anxiety-filled hours, only 2 more people are left. The applicant is trying to stay calm. He wants the interviewer to think he's confident, but he can't help but feel nervous. His foot taps as he checks the time. Every second feels like an hour. Maybe he should have brought a book. It would have kept him distracted and made him look smart in front of his prospective employer. But instead of reading, all the applicant can do is examine the office carpet. The carpet is bright red, decorated with lines that make blocky, overlapping shapes. The applicant wonders if it's meant to look like terracotta paving or something. It doesn't really match with the aesthetic of the building, Ponderosa Plaza. The offices of Gilbert and Evans are new, so new that the applicant can detect the lingering smell of the recently applied paint. He thinks he might have heard the secretary mention that the carpet got replaced recently. Aside from the secretary, the only other person in the room is the other candidate. She's been reading a book while she calmly waits to be called in. Of course she brought a book. The applicant is jealous of her calm appearance. His only solace comes in remembering that she's probably nervous too, but is just better than him at hiding it. After what feels like an eternity, the interviewer opens the door. The interviewer calls the woman's name, and she stands up, tucking her book under her arm. The applicant wishes her good luck, and she nods before going into the other room. Minutes pass. The applicant tries to soothe his nerves by tracing the patterns in the carpet with his eyes, but it's no use. His mouth feels extremely dry. He can feel his tongue sticking to the backs of his teeth and weighing down his lower jaw. He gulps, trying desperately to ease the dry sensation. The secretary had asked him if he wanted some water earlier, but he declined, like a fool. This might be the last chance he gets before he goes into the interview. Hesitantly, he waves to get the secretary's attention. Then, in a hoarse voice, he asks for a cup of water. As the secretary goes to get the water, the applicant glances back down. He could swear the pattern on the carpet had moved, but that couldn't be possible, could it? He needs to focus. He tries to cross his legs, but can't. Something seems to be holding his leg down. Before he can even register what's happening to him, the applicant starts to feel woozy. Something is very wrong here, but the applicant can't do anything about it. He feels weak and cold. Darkness starts to creep into his vision, and then everything around goes black. Meanwhile, the interview is going smoothly. The woman being interviewed is calm, put together, and seems qualified for the position. The interviewer has gone through enough people today to have a pretty good idea of who's going to be invited back, but there's still one more person to speak to. Right now, as he absently shakes hands with the woman and wishes her the best, really he's thinking about what he'll order for lunch. Salad? Maybe a burrito? Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream rings out from the waiting room. The woman and the interviewer both rush to the door and throw it open. They see the secretary, her face ashen, her outstretched hand pointing at the last applicant of the day, slumped over in his chair. Dead. The offices of Gilbert and Evans soon go into lockdown. It doesn't take long for the paramedics to realize that something isn't right about the applicant's body. The interviewer and the secretary both assumed that he died of a sudden stress-induced heart attack. Obviously, it's a tragedy in someone so young, of course, but not completely unheard of in the legal field. However, the body doesn't show any signs of having suffered cardiac arrest. There's also the fact that the applicant didn't make a noise before he passed away, not even a gasp. In fact, it seems he went very peacefully, all things considered. But the strangest thing about the applicant's corpse is that there's not a drop of blood in his body. Not only that, but there's no blood at the scene. There are no obvious puncture wounds, but how else could a man have been drained of blood so quickly? With no other possible explanation, the death of the applicant is treated as a murder, and the city's top homicide detective is called in. The detective questions the woman, the secretary, and the interviewer, and they all tell the same story. The applicant seemed nervous, which was to be expected. He asked for water, and then while the secretary was out of the room, he dropped dead. The detective conducts a thorough examination of the room. Nothing out of the ordinary, not even stains in the carpet. Well, apart from the wet spot where the secretary dropped the cup of water in shock. The detective's best theory is that someone must have used a pump or some kind of machine to drain the applicant's blood. But the logistics of something like that happening seem unlikely. The secretary didn't see anything. There are no visible signs of a large machine even having been in the room. There's no depression marks in the carpet. No one heard the telltale sounds of machinery. As the detective examines the room further, the witnesses are escorted away, and the other officers turn their focus to checking the hallways. The building's doorman is questioned about any suspicious characters who might have come into the building that morning. Perhaps one of the other interviewees was trying to boost their chances of getting hired by eliminating the competition. After a thorough examination, the detective heads back to the station and starts to complete the paperwork for the case. It's far from the worst death the detective's ever investigated, but something about it sticks with him for the rest of the day. As he scribbles his notes, thoughts bounce around inside his head. The applicant's death is worse than gruesome. It's confusing. Why would the killer have picked him as a victim? Why, if the killer was a fellow applicant motivated by jealousy, would they have only stopped at one victim? The case is so puzzling, the detective almost forgets to take his shoes off before getting into bed that night, something he regularly does when he's consumed by a case. He counts himself lucky to live alone. He slips off his shoes, places them next to the bed, and drifts off to sleep. The following morning, the detective wakes up. He checks his phone to see if the crime lab had any revelations during the night that could potentially crack this case. Nothing. Disheartened, he starts his day. He swings his legs out of bed, but something is wrong. As soon as he puts his feet down on the carpet, he feels a heavy weight pulling down on them, as though something is grabbing onto them. The detective looks down. Something wide and flat has engulfed his foot entirely, something that's the same color as his bedroom carpet. The detective tries to scream, but the more of his body that's engulfed by the carpet, the more he's overcome by a wave of exhaustion. He feels cold and numb, two things that he knows are symptoms of rapid blood loss. At that moment, he understands what happened to the job applicant. By the time anyone questions his absence from work, the detective will be long dead, a victim of the same mysterious blood loss that he'd been brought in to investigate. Naturally, when a detective investigating a mysterious death falls victim to that same mysterious death on the very next day, the SCP Foundation takes notice. The Foundation was quick to lock down the Ponderosa Plaza building and the detective's home, and deliver amnestics to everyone present. As far as the witnesses know, nobody but police or paramedics ever arrived on the scene, and both the applicant and the detective died of unfortunately timed heart attacks. The carpets in both locations were eventually removed and replaced at a discounted rate by a trusted local business called Superior Carpet Professionals. This was done to hopefully prevent any further deaths caused by SCP-522, the blood-sucking carpet. SCP-522 looks at first glance like an ordinary swatch of red, geometrically patterned carpet. When being observed by more than one person, it's completely inert. But if a victim is left alone in a room with it, it will rip itself from the floor, wrap around whatever body parts it can reach, and insert thousands of microscopic filaments into the victim's skin. SCP-522 can suck every drop of blood out of a living creature in a matter of minutes. Once the victim is completely exsanguinated, the creature lets its prey go and returns to its spot on the floor as if nothing happened. When another person enters the room, they find a blanched corpse that appears to have just dropped dead while nobody was looking. While the sample in Foundation containment is bright red, this color, in fact, has nothing to do with the creature's gruesome diet, and instances of SCP-522 can appear in any color of carpet. Further investigation into the creature's structure has uncovered that this is because the carpet itself isn't alive. It's merely become infested with a mysterious and aggressive form of unknown slime mold that thrives in carpet fibers. For this reason, anyone working with SCP-522 is required to wear a full hazmat suit and go through standard decontamination procedures after leaving the containment cell. As we learned from the case of the unfortunate detective, it's all too possible to create new instances of SCP-522 simply by standing in a previous instance and tracking it onto the carpet in another location. This is backed up by anecdotal evidence suggesting that instances of SCP-522 have never been recorded attacking victims who live in shoes-off households. SCP-522 is fed a live pig or animal of equivalent size once a week. This schedule is somewhat arbitrary, as it's unclear how long the organism can actually survive between feedings. Like many ambush predators, it can be very patient when it wants to be. Outside of testing conditions, absolutely no personnel are permitted to enter SCP-522's enclosure without supervision. The carpet mostly behaves like an animal, but seems to have a limited intelligence or at least a higher awareness of its surroundings. Through animal and human testing, the Foundation has been able to determine that the carpet can tell the difference between a sentient person and an animal. If a D-Class is made to stand in the center of SCP-522, while another observes from the other side of the room, SCP-522 will remain inert. The same happens if a rat is placed on SCP-522, while a D-Class observes. But when two rats are placed in the same positions, SCP-522 will simply attack and exsanguinate one despite the presence of the other. Tests involving a D-Class standing on top of the carpet while a rat observes yielded the same results. So, SCP-522 only acts when it isn't being observed by human eyes specifically. It is yet to be determined if SCP-522 knows a human witness would be able to raise an alarm and warn away future victims. Despite seeming to be aware of the difference between humans and animals, however, it doesn't seem to be able to account for the cameras that are constantly filming within its enclosure. When presented with an opportunity to hunt, seemingly nothing can stop SCP-522 from engulfing its prey. In one test, Foundation personnel stapled the carpet to the floor to see if this would impede it. A D-Class was made to stand in the center of the carpet. SCP-522 showed considerable strength when ripping the staples out of the floor and quickly engulfed and exsanguinated the D-Class. Another test was done with a heavy desk partially placed on top of SCP-522 while a D-Class was also standing on it. SCP-522 was actually able to wriggle itself out from under the desk, exsanguinate the D-Class, then slip itself back under the desk. Given how easily the SCP-522 organism can spread, and how stealthy and persistent a hunter it continually proves itself to be, the Foundation has naturally considered if it may have some potential real-world applications. If the right controls were put in place, for example, it could serve as the perfect tool for covert political assassinations. Attempts are underway to breed and cultivate more of this organism in the lab, pending approval. For now, thanks to the Foundation's efforts, the only known surviving instance of SCP-522 exists in containment. But given that it can spread to any carpet, it is recommended that all of our followers give their carpets a thorough clean. Maybe start leaving your shoes at the door when you come home, just to be safe. And if you're looking to renovate or move into a new home anytime soon, you should probably consider sticking to hardwood floors.